The guest stars like to pray, but is this episode a yay or a nay? We could tell by the pre-credit teaser that this would be as slow as an old geezer. These damn religious zealots still make me need some energy pellets. This was yet another dud. The show feels stuck in the mud. For all the talk of desecration, it commits the worst sin in our Trek nation. It's all so bland and pointless, so dumb and meaningless. I hated this episode. It made me want to drill my frontal node.
Wow, gave you a lot of time to write that. I guess you took advantage of it.
Well, it was 45 minutes of boring, so I decided to focus on that. Anyway,
I'm Josh.
I'm Justin, and this is From There to Here. And today we are looking at Season 3, Episode 12, Chosen Realm. And according to the IMDb, the description of the episode is, Enterprise is taken over by religious zealots who want to use the ship in a war against heretics.
I'm guessing no one chose this as their favorite episode, though.
I would guess not.
I'm thinking, since you haven't done the rating yet, I'm guessing this is probably I'm going to say 6.5.
I'm going to agree with you about the sixes. I'm going to say, I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to say a 6.5.
Okay.
So let's see. 6.7.
That's higher than I think it deserves.
I know, man. This is like borderline, whatchamacallit. God, I always forget that first season episode. What's it called?
Terra Nova?
Terra Nova. This is like Terra Nova territory.
I thought you were going to say borderline Rogue Planet. I was like, because that's quite the coincidence, because on Wikipedia, there isn't much to be talked about. Nobody wanted to talk about it at all. The only real production note is guest star Connor O'Farrell, who played the religious leader Djamat, was previously on Enterprise in the season 1 episode Rogue Planet as a hunter.
How about that?
You're in two of the crappiest ones. Connor O'Farrell. Yeah.
Okay.
There's really no other production notes other than what a reviewer noted that I thought was kind of interesting, but which I didn't pick up on, which is that reviewers noted that the episode copies the ending of the TOS episode Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, with Bureau 42 noting the simple switch of using religion instead of racism. I guess Bureau 42 is an internet person.
Yeah.
But I suppose I don't recall Let That Be Your Last Battlefield well enough. Do you agree?
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Let That Be Your Last Battlefield ends with the two of them being beamed onto a planet or somewhere where they're just going to fight constantly. Like till the end of time. I think even Kirk even says something like, "Oh, they'll just battle forever." But this one, granted, it's hard to remember because I only saw half of the episode because I think I slept for the other half. But
I was nodding off a little bit.
I was so bored with it. But I thought, did Archer not take him to a planet to see like the effect of war or something he did?
Oh, you really were falling asleep. He took them. he took them to a planet where one half had destroyed the other half. It was just like their factions were fighting against each other. These religious factions in the episode, they run into heretics,
right?
But they're the same species. They run into these heretics because they believe that the universe was created in 10 days and not 9 or something like that. And so this was supposed to be showing them, this is the result of you fighting against each other. You destroyed your planet, or one of your planets, I suppose.
Okay. I still think that
at least that's what I picked up on it. I mean, I was kind of drifting off too. I did come to life during the latter half of the episode. Like I started to get some energy back. I really started drifting off in the first half. But in the second half, when things got a little bit more interesting, admittedly,
I had so checked out by then.
It was a bit more interesting. There was some firefights. Always a little bit of action in there can help wake you up a little bit.
Yeah.
But trying to regain the ship, regain control of the ship, made it a little bit more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Not that much more interesting, but it's sort of.
It's a real red flag, I guess you could say, for an episode when there's well choreographed action scenes and they still just don't bring you into the episode. I mean,
well,
to me, I was just so uninterested in these guys. I just didn't care. Did not care.
Well, they weren't very interesting. Well, we didn't note this was written by Manny Koto, and it was directed by Roxanne Dawson.
Right.
Not that the director matters as much as the writer.
I don't know. I think it's a combination, man. I mean,
well, Manny Koto,
yeah,
is responsible for much of the fourth season, right?
Right.
So the fact that he wrote this one, I thought some parts of it were okay. No?
It's not that it was like poorly made or anything like that. The performances are fine. There's nothing on a technical level. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just one of Enterprise's, primary sins where it's been done before. It's been done before and better. Mm-hmm. Literally on their own show, they've done this stuff before. And I'm Manny Koto, yes, because he does get the credit for season 4. I'm sure he was just doing his job. They said, all right, make a story about this. And it's written in a writer's room. It's not like he solely wrote it. He probably just had the general idea and all that. And again, so, the director, the writer and all that, it's not that there was anything wrong. It's just been done. And if you're going to have a character or set of characters that are zealots of some form, right? Man, I think dramatically, the thing you have to crack before you sit down to write the beat for beats of the episode is how are you going to make these characters compelling?
Right.
How are you going to make them interesting? You don't even necessarily have to root for them, but make them interesting.
Cybok was interesting.
Cybok is an awesome example of how an actor can elevate the material.
Yeah.
But also he's an example of a character that his quest is kind of interesting, and he's passionate about it. And he is a great example of that. But then look at Khan. These guys are zealots in another fashion, but they're so interesting. And I'm talking,
it's a cult like.
It is a cult-like thing. And I'm talking about the episode, not Wrath of Khan, the movie. He was compelling. He was interesting. He would have killed every single person on that ship with no problem, but he was still interesting to watch. And I had another example in my mind, but now I'm forgetting it. But still, there are other examples in Star Trek where characters like this are interesting, and these guys just are not. They're just not at all.
No, they were all earth tones,
and what really
they
bothers
had hippie
me,
hair.
That was the episode I was going to mention.
What?
It was the hippie episode of TOS, The Way to Eden, which is generally
Yay, brother.
On like the bottom 10 of worst episodes.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what though. Go back and watch that episode. Yes, it's no mirror. It's no changeling, but it's kind of entertaining because they're so batshit crazy.
Yeah.
And the whole premise was nutty, but then they found a way to humanize it by making, and I forget who it was or something like that, but it had someone in that group was like the son or daughter of a Starfleet admiral or something. So, these people came from Federation roots, but they became these nut jobs, at least from the Enterprise perspective. That made them interesting. They were so off the wall, they were interesting. These guys were just bland. At least the hippies were hippies, and like you could really enjoy their nuttiness. And they sang, for God's sake. I mean, at least they brought some entertainment aboard the ship. And that guy who, it's so funny that he would play a space hippie in TOS, yet later in his career, he almost always would play cigar chomping generals. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I think so.
The guy that was the general in the Deep Space Nine episode,
Little Green Men.
That
guy. Yeah.
He was one of those.
That's the guy. Yeah, you're right. I forgot.
Charles.
Yeah.
Something.
Right.
And he's totally a gas to watch. This episode, again, but this episode had none of that. Just none of it.
Right.
They just weren't. And another thing that bothers me, not just in this episode, but pick any, usually it's sci-fi, but any sort of religious zealot whose belief is built around something that kind of logically, to me anyway, does not make any sense. These guys believe that the spheres were made by the builders are gods, and so on and so forth, right?
I remember that part.
I remember that because that was in the first few minutes before I started.
Yeah, they call them the makers.
They're the makers, whatever. But I have a hard time believing that anyone with any rational thought processes in their mind, any intelligent person would believe that a deity would make something technology based. You know what I mean? Which the spheres are. The spheres are technology. Usually gods or deities, godlike creatures, they create something natural. It's a natural thing. And not a friggin' Death Star.
Those spheres aren't Death Stars. They're hollow, right?
But they're clearly built. And to me, it's like that line from what's that? Prometheus.
Mm-hmm.
When they get to the planet and they're looking around and the captain goes, "Where should we go? Where are we going?" And the scientist guy looks around the landscape and he looks and he sees two straight lines, like basically like a landing strip. And he said, "That's where we're going." And he goes, "How do you know?" He said, "God doesn't build in straight lines." And I thought that was a brilliant, simple line, but I don't think gods build technology. That just doesn't add up. And to me, that's a mark of poor writing. There is an episode, maybe you'll remember, it was in the first or second season of Enterprise, where it was those guys that Silic slipped in with, and they were there to see the holy nebula, the holy event.
Yeah.
But at least that was something of nature. No man built that nebula, you know what I mean? So you can understand how someone could assign religious belief to that, but not something clearly constructed, artificial. I have a real beef with that. It happens sometimes, and usually in sci-fi, that tends to be where you see that. And I don't like it. It makes your protagonist or antagonist, depending on your view, makes them look stupid. Because like, who would believe that?
Well, I guess I didn't have a problem with it. I mean, these spheres were left behind apparently a very, very long time ago.
Right.
By who they don't know.
Right.
I certainly see your point, but
sorry, man, I kind of went off on.
I know your point is valid, but I mean the story didn't move me enough for me to really consider that. I was okay, whatever. I
was so uninterested that I found myself fixating on things.
Their
like
backstory was weak, and I said, okay, they think they're the gods, put these spheres here, fine, and they're going to use that as some kind of impetus to take over the Enterprise. Fine, I didn't care. That's whatever. I mean, these characters were so generic, for lack of a better word. They did not give them any kind of nuance.
No,
even the character, the second in command, if you want to call him that, the right arm man, right hand man, not right arm man, right hand man.
I know. Yeah, Lieutenant Bland.
Lieutenant Bland. Yeah, even he wasn't interesting. Like they could have done something with him.
Well, they had that whole subplot, which didn't go much.
You mean
of
him
anywhere.
with his pregnant wife?
His pregnant wife. Like there was an interesting. It's like they had an idea in the writer's room and then they got off track.
What was their idea then?
What their idea could have been, potentially, I'm guessing, was looking at a false leader. And, here's one of the followers of this leader not wanting to follow his thing because of XYZ, but they're afraid. And then you have his right arm man who is also questioning things. And that's interesting, potentially. They were definitely seeding that like that was gonna not just be the reason why his right arm man turned on him, but that there was some sort of underlying thing in there to where it implied that many more people were kind of tired of this and all that, but it never felt important.
Never coalesced into anything.
Not in any substantial way that got my attention. That's for sure.
No, I mean, if there was some kind of reasoning where it had something to do with his unborn child, and you can get that as an inference, but still, there wasn't. Didn't the woman want to terminate the pregnancy?
Yeah,
that's right. It was so underwhelming. I kind of forgot about that.
That's what I'm saying. Like that's a big deal.
Yeah. What did she wanted to do that because she didn't want to bring the child into this environment, right?
That sounds probably.
Okay. And what exactly were they doing with the Enterprise? I don't recall what their plan was. I mean, at least in Star Trek V, I knew they were going to the Great Barrier, but
okay. I hate to say it because we literally just watched this, but
I don't remember.
I feel like the original idea was that that their intention was to capture and destroy the Enterprise because it desecrated the spheres and all that. It was just they were a target.
That's right.
But then he's like, wait, we could kind of use this to further our mission.
That's right. They were upset that Enterprise had desecrated one of them.
Right.
But then they spared them because they saved them. Because these cult members, their ship was adrift or something like that. They were something. They were in need of assistance. Enterprise came to their assistance. So they did save them, but
I feel like that was a setup though. Because they like their ship just wasn't coincidentally.
Well, then why, if it was a setup, then why would the cult leader use that as a reason not to kill any one of the crew when he said, well, you did save us, so I owe you for that?
It's a good question.
He said that to Archer.
Because he knew all about Enterprise, like they were waiting for them. Mighty big coincidence that they just happen to run into these guys that they have a real moral beef with.
It's a Star Trek episode. There's coincidences every episode.
I guess.
So let that part go. Yeah, what their ultimate motive was, I'm not really sure.
It doesn't really matter. Here we have another episode that doesn't have anything to do with the Xindi.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Yeah.
Between when we finished and now, I thought, we say this every episode, and we're not the only critics of this.
Sure.
But I think we're just being a little too harsh on it. With our kind of Futuro eyes looking back on the past here, where we think every episode's going to have to be in this.
Well, we never thought that.
Xindi arc. In the past, I certainly didn't. I accepted self-contained episodes that didn't have anything to do with the Xindi, really. I mean, even this character, this cult leader says, who are the Xindi? I've never heard of them.
Right.
And I really makes me pause. I'm like, really? Never?
Like you're in their sort of backyard.
You don't know?
They seem like a pretty big presence here.
Yeah. And I mean, how many other species have they run into where they're like, we've never even heard of them? Like, well, how big of a threat are these Xindi? No one's ever heard of these guys.
I know. I'm willing to concede the idea, and I think we did talk about this earlier, that the producers, the writers and all that they didn't necessarily see the Xindi arc the way we're used to seeing season-long arcs now. Mm-hmm. So I'm willing to concede that. However, I do think the argument could be made that once they cross the threshold of one or two episodes where, the beginning of the season, when clearly this is going to be an ongoing thing, I don't think it's unreasonable as the viewer now or then to expect threat. And we really do not feel any threat from the Xindi. What episode is this?
I don't know. 13?
12. Oh. We're halfway through the season.
Yeah.
And there's just no friggin' threat from the Xindi at all.
And last week's episode was Carpenter Street.
I'm just saying, there is no threat.
At least the Xindi were in that.
It wouldn't be so bad the kind of getting away from the Zindi and coming back to them in these tiny, insignificant ways, it wouldn't be so bad if the ultimate crime of the Zindi wasn't so bad.
Mm-hmm.
But we know that it is. So when you tease us with literally a world-ending problem,
right,
then you had better take it seriously yourself and stop pussyfooting around. And I never ever said that every episode has to do with the Zindi. I think if it did, that would be painfully boring and a real pain in the ass, because you could never just drop in and catch an episode. But man, you got to find a way to keep this threat. And I know you and I have said this many times. They are just not doing that. And I am so disappointed in this season because of that. I'd go back to season 1 and 2 before I went to season 3 again, ever, because it's weak sauce. It adds up to nothing.
Yeah, we've had maybe a scant few episodes we've really kind of liked,
and even then, they either get undone or they're too few and far between. And it's just,
I thought you were about to say too fruity.
Too fruity. I love. No, so I honestly, man, I hate to be a downer about this show. I feel like all I'm doing is talking negatively, and I hate that feeling. And I don't want that to be the thing. But they are making it really hard to stay invested in this show. And that deserves to be pointed out.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot they could have done with this episode. Something. But it does feel so pointless in the end. Like you could skip past this and never miss anything. That's not to say that, of course, there aren't TNG episodes you could just,
of course,
go past. But at least those were fewer, right? And at least they did have something maybe noteworthy about them somewhere in there. Maybe about like a TNG, like a bland TNG episode.
Oh, well, sure. But I mean, even if you look at Deep Space Nine, I mean, you could most definitely argue that from season 4 onward, that was their Zindi plot, and certainly by the time you got to 6 and 7, the war was on, and that was always there. But they still stopped, and they had, for crying out loud, what's the episode, the Ferengi episode everyone hates, but we like, the cross-dressing episode?
Is that Prophet and Lace?
Prophet and Lace. That one, what is that, season 6 or 7?
Pretty sure it's 6.
They're in, like, the station had been occupied, like all this stuff, and they stop and they have Some Like It Hot, in the middle of Deep Space Nine. And never, even then or now, whenever we have rewatched Deep Space Nine, does it ever feel out of place? Does it feel like they've slowed to a crawl? They cracked the code of being able to have this war going on in the background and then have it take the forefront sometimes. And then other times it's not as in your face, but it's always there.
Maybe if this, like you're saying, Enterprise had arranged itself better for this season.
Yeah.
Kept the Zindi plot in the background, but still kept it alive.
It's just when they come up, it's got to be dire. And the few times it has come up, it's not dire.
No.
At all.
But these other episodes that last week, Carpenter Street, this week, Chosen Realm, I mean, they're so uninteresting. It's kind of a miracle of blandness that they were able to do this for so many, so often, and so many in a row. It seems, it's kind of like that in the beginning of Idiocracy when they're showing the graph. He's like he's suspiciously average. Actually, every chart shows the same thing. I'm doing a paper on this guy.
It's really scientifically fascinating that someone could be this bland.
I mean, that's kind of like what this feels like sometimes. And you're like, gosh, are they trying to hit that measurement? It's like, let's make every episode like Emergence from TNG. You're like, oh, okay, you don't have to.
That's funny.
But that's kind of what it's feeling like.
Okay, I had to look this up. So you are right. Prophet and Lace is season 6, episode 23, and it is sandwiched between there it goes, The Reckoning, Valiant, 2 strong episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Prophet and Lace.
Yeah.
Then Time's Orphan.
Ooh.
The Sound of Her Voice. Powerhouse episodes.
Well, Time's Orphan isn't a powerhouse.
No, I'm more thinking of Sound of Her Voice, but Time's Orphan's I like Time's Orphan.
It's okay.
It's a nice little diversion. But Prophet, no one talks badly about Time's Orphan, but they do talk badly about Prophet and Lace. And I'm looking at this. I mean, In the Pale Moonlight was just a few episodes before.
Mm-hmm.
The point I'm making is that when they hit hard, like with the threat, it hits hard.
Mm-hmm.
And Deep Space Nine, brilliantly at this point in the show, had 2 major things going on. There was the war, of course. Then there was the whole Bajor thing, which was really teetering. You know, they didn't know, were these guys going to make it? Were they going to get to be part of the Federation?
Mm-hmm.
Dukat, I think, had moved his way over to kind of being, it was personal between him and the Bajorans. You know, there was a lot going on. And yet they stop to throw in Prophet and Lace. And like I said, it never feels like, what in God's name are they doing? I know some people don't like the episode, but
it really makes me wonder. It makes me laugh. I don't know why.
It makes me laugh.
Why don't you think it's funny?
But even forget Prophet and Lace. Just
that's
look
the
at
Sluggo Cola episode.
the slimiest cola in the galaxy. I think it's a great episode. But even if you put that aside,
yeah, it's fun.
And look at Time's Orphan,
mm-hmm.
it's the same logic applies. It was a nice slow down. Let's just have a personal episode.
Uh-huh.
The stuff's still going on. None of that is undone. The threat is still there. Right. And immediately after that, bam, we're hit again.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they never let you go too far before you started to forget, oh yeah, there's a serious thing going on.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
so you're saying that Enterprise could have done similar.
That's what I'm saying is there's an example
mm-hmm.
of how it definitely worked and
mm-hmm.
how they managed to keep that thread alive and still insert episodes that were either just kind of personal dramas or wacky comedies. And yet the flow of the show was never hurt.
So, I mean, you think in this case with Chosen Realm or something like Carpenter Street, but let's stick with Chosen Realm since we just watched it, that they try to go too big too often with their stories. I mean, this religious group that takes over the ship, I mean, could they have played it more small scale and give us a personal story like Prophet and Lace or like Time's Orphan where it's a character piece?
I don't think it's a matter of the episode itself being too large scale or too small scale. I think that the beef with the season at large is that there's not enough serious reminders of the threat they're facing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not brought up often enough, and it's not brought up with severity enough. I don't think there's any problem with any non-Xindi episode being high or low.
No, I see your point. Yes. Maybe that threat isn't present enough, and when it comes, it's not strong enough.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
I mean, wouldn't it be nice if instead of something like Chosen Realm, we get a personal episode about just the crew, where it's a bottle show, but just the crew dealing with the fact that they're in this place, this alien place. They haven't seen any other humans in months. They're lonely. They're starting to get some, what's the
cabin fever?
Yeah, cabin fever. And
100%.
Yeah, it's just a character study of them like trying to figure out how to like keep their sanity. And now, maybe they're like, oh, let's bring back movie night and let's make it fun. And they're like, no, this isn't that fun. Maybe we should do something else. Well, what do you want to, something to explore the character's anxiety, something.
That's arguably what The Sound of Her Voice is, where they had to stop and everyone had to have their position checked, because they were all getting distant from each other. And it was all, what a great bottle episode and a great way to slow it down because they're addressing the threat. What's happening to them is happening because of the threat. What a great way to do that. But this one, I'm going to writer's room this. You ready?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So what if this episode did come across a religious...
The stewardesses were actually ghosts. Sorry.
No one gets that.
I know. Sorry.
And it was all just so boring.
I gave up. Okay.
So Archer tries to make a point to the religious zealot guy at the end, right? by saying, look what this sort of thinking gets. It gets a world destroyed and no one wins.
Extremism.
Right.
Yeah.
So what if there was a religious zealot or group where, let's say they got a beef with, maybe they probably shouldn't make it this indie. Let's say there's just another species that they have a beef with because this species did something really bad to them. And now there's so few of them left, right? Kind of unlike the humans indie problem. And their zealot attitude is that they are going to destroy this species. And Enterprise has somehow just crossed paths and gotten in the way. And this guy's like, look, these guys got to go. They have to go. They are bad, evil people, and we have to destroy them all. And the world will be better for it. The universe will be better. And Archer would be naturally going, you can't do that. You can't commit genocide. What's wrong with you? You know, all this. And the whole time he doesn't realize that he's arguing against his own thought process. Like Archer wants to decimate the Xindi. And that could be, and could have been.
Well, have they really crossed that Rubicon yet where he said, like, I want to annihilate the Xindi?
Well, they should have. That's what I'm saying. That's the kind of thing that should have been happening in this season where, I mean, they're certainly doing their best to portray Archer as so driven and angry.
You're right. It's a better conflict than what they came up with. You're right.
At least then make the guy or group compelling, like make them be tiny people, something like
midgets. What are you talking about?
That's not what I mean to say.
Okay.
I just mean make them vulnerable, make them not look intimidating. Nothing about them would be scary. So you would feel protective of them, yet they're looking to do this bad, evil thing. You know what I mean? But it's bad and evil from a certain perspective. Make them interesting, you know, make them sympathetic, which these guys are not remotely sympathetic. So you don't care. Do that, do that. Or if you don't want to do any of that, if you're going to do just a religious zealot and all that, almost always in the examples of our world, whenever you have a religious zealot of some sort, they're almost always full of shit.
Right.
In the sense that, they claim this and that, but they'll never put themselves up for it. They'll claim this and that, but really they just want a bunch of chicks in their bed.
Yeah.
This was like expose it.
What was I thinking of? What was the name of that in the 90s? That David Koresh, wasn't it in Oklahoma or Texas or something like that? What were they called?
You mean the
Branch Davidians or something like that?
That's one.
Waco. It was in Waco.
What was that group? What were they called?
I think they were called the Branch Davidians.
Was it?
Yeah, I think so. But it was in Waco. That was the name I was looking for.
Okay.
But it felt like that kind of cult group in space.
Sure.
And it's like, okay. Sure. But apparently this guy in real life, this David Koresh guy, was supposed to be very like magnetic and charismatic. And this guy, who's a fine actor, don't get me wrong.
There's nothing wrong with him.
They didn't give him anything to like he wasn't Khan where he was magnetic. Like, I'd follow this guy, nothing. There was nothing really interesting about his cause. No, not really. But I mean, you make a good point, where maybe if Archer and everyone else on Enterprise, for that matter, starts questioning their fervent desire to kill the Xindi, and maybe they actually have that thought. Maybe Archer does, where he says, like, I would wipe them out if I had the chance, and maybe that gives him pause, right? And he starts to think, are we actually doing the right thing? And maybe it could be a choice between like this. They start to sympathize with the smaller group, like you said, compared to this other group that wants to wipe them out. And maybe he gets caught up in the moral relativism of it all. But then he says, well, at the end, this smaller group could actually be evil. And they just are only seeming sympathetic because they're being wiped out. And he says, well, at the end of the day, good is good and evil is evil. And maybe they could take that route. I mean, maybe that would be a little bit more unexpected. Sure as hell would be more interesting than what we got, which was kind of a throwaway episode, which it didn't have to be.
No, it
certainly could have been.
It didn't
something.
have to be. No.
I mean, there was definitely potential. Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, your story was a hell of a lot more interesting.
I mean, that's just off the cuff. I mean, it's just such a shame.
Yeah.
Such a shame. So much wasted potential that this season has had.
Mm-hmm.
And I do not understand. I would love to know what they were thinking. And I don't mean like in a negative sense. Like, what was their original intent, and how in their minds did they see this playing out? And do the writers and producers of season 3 of Enterprise, do they look back on it and think what we think? Man, we weren't keeping that threat alive. I would love to know if they see it that way too. Not to say that there aren't good episodes in there, but as a whole, do they see it that way as well?
I'm willing to bet they do. That they see it as somewhat of a failure.
Yeah.
That they didn't keep it, the threat, they didn't keep it alive enough. And that was at a crucial time in this show's history where they were already on the verge of being canceled.
Sure.
Because if I remember right, season 3 wasn't exactly guaranteed, right? Didn't they have to claw their way back?
I feel like
they were going to be canceled after the second season.
I think so.
They managed to squeeze out a third and then a fourth somehow.
And I'm looking. There we are. So 1, 2, 3. So I mean, this was in 2003, and I try to temper my thoughts about this stuff with the idea that in 2003, what else was being made? There certainly weren't big season-long arcs the way there are now. We know that. I'm trying to think of anything that's contemporary. The only show that I can think of.
Well, TV was far less sophisticated back then.
Yes.
So, I mean, you and I
we go. Okay, yeah. I've told you this story before.
Mm-hmm.
Farscape aired from...
Funny, I was just thinking about Farscape.
Really?
That's so weird.
It aired from 1999 to 2003.
Uh-huh.
So literally, and I've told you this story, and now this somewhat does not add up to my story now that I say it out loud.
Okay.
But I remember, I remember watching the extras for season 4 of Farscape, where one of the producers came up and he was talking to the cast after shooting for a day or something, and he was telling them that they were canceled.
Yeah, right.
And he read a letter that came from someone else, some other high person, not a fan. It was someone associated with the show, and it specifically called out Enterprise as the current Star Trek show being made, saying that compared to Farscape, Enterprise is a lumbering dinosaur. And when you realize that these shows were being made at the same time, Farscape really did show how at that time they did have season-long arcs, and they did have constant threats that would be brought back and then, step aside for a show or two and then come back. So, but Farscape, I would argue, was definitely an anomaly. Like, it was ahead of its time, very much so in so many different ways. And so keeping that, I'm trying to actually make the argument for Enterprise that the sort of things that we're being critical of were just not the norm at the time. So the writers of Enterprise may have wanted to do more of the things we're talking about, but maybe we're being held back by the studio, for example, saying, guys, you cannot serialize this. Like, you have to be able to drop in.
Well, no, I think you're right. I definitely feel the feeling of the writers, producers playing it safe. And I know we've used that expression before.
I doubt it's the writers.
Okay.
Writers love to take chances,
Okay.
So I would say it's a producer thing,
Yeah, they don't want to go too far in either direction.
Yeah, they're afraid. Sure.
And they want to appeal to too many people. So, but when you try to do that, you just get something very generic.
Right.
That really appeals to no one. It's just kind of passing entertainment that you're not really going to get that excited about.
Yeah.
I mean, it's no wonder why people bailed on the show.
I have no question why they bailed on the show. Sadly. whereas something like Farscape got more and more daring as the show went on. He got less and less viewers. Yeah. However, that show built up a cult, and like people that's an example of being so far ahead of its time. People didn't know what to make of that. And it was so kind of buried. It wasn't always seen the way it should have been, yeah. So had Enterprise been more like that, would it have been successful? Who knows? Farscape wasn't until much later, So would if season 3 of Enterprise was more like Farscape, for example, would it have been canceled and then people look back years later and go, man, they had something amazing?
I think you're also being a little unfair to Star Trek in this case, to Enterprise, because Farscape owed nothing to anyone.
True. They didn't have anything to lose.
No, but plus they had nothing to live up to. They had no past. I mean, Enterprise had 40 years of Star Trek to live up to.
You're absolutely right.
We got to give people the same taste of Coke. You can't change the formula.
You are absolutely right. And that is a very, very fair
probably used that analogy before.
But as right as you are, just look back a few years earlier at Deep Space Nine, where they did do this sort of thing successfully. But the difference, though, is that they, quote unquote, were not the people that were running Enterprise. Yes, Rick Berman was still executive producer.
I think there's something to it. I know we said this before, but I think there's something to the fact that DS9 was made when it wasn't under that UPN umbrella, but Enterprise was. And so they were able to get away with it more. Like they were able to take chances. Their writers had more freedom. I think you're right. Enterprise didn't.
No, I think you're right. I think another factor is that while Deep Space Nine has aged very well because of those things, it was also due to reasons having nothing to do with the quality of the show. The show consistently got lower and lower ratings was considered, I don't want to say a failure, but was considered.
They call it like the redheaded stepchild.
Yeah, it was just not well regarded the way TNG was. And
because it wasn't that flavor.
It wasn't that flavor. And Rick Berman pretty much stepped away from the show. I mean, he let Ira Bear do whatever he wanted. That was not, you watch Deep Space Nine after the first couple seasons, that is not a Rick Berman production. That is someone else. He's okay, you can use those uniforms. No, you can't do this. But the story beats are not Rick Berman. And I can, to defend what you're saying, I can understand why, though the quality of Deep Space Nine was awesome, its ratings were shit. So I can see Berman going, okay, that's not working. Maybe let's go back. And then they tried it with Voyager. Let's try and get back to Voyager. And then they thought, okay, strike two. All right. We did TNG Light. That wasn't quite right enough. So now let's go to our roots, right? The roots of Star Trek. That's what people want, the roots. And they did that, or they thought they did that for 2 seasons.
Right.
And it was a little weak sauce. Partly, there's a couple factors. So now they're thinking, well, we have this interesting idea, Starfleet guys in jeans and ball caps, like they're still digging that idea. But now they're feeling, even themselves, I think they're feeling, oh, it's too safe. We need to shake it up. Hence season 3. But like you very rightly point out, they owe the audience something, or they think they do.
Yeah.
And so they're
and these are some of the most rabid fans, that will hold them to their feet to the fire about the lore.
100%.
Absolutely. So of course, that's always going to be in the back of their minds.
Yeah. And how could it not be?
How could it not be? They're caught in a rock and a hard place.
They really are.
How can you satisfy new audiences and the old ones? You can't.
It's
and that's why we get episodes like Chosen Realm, basically.
And that's why we get current Star Wars, right? It's the same thing.
Oh, I think that's like
they try to appease fans, but they try and give you something different, and you can't.
Well, Star Wars. From what I've seen, it's been taken over by absolute lunatics. Like these people,
100%.
These people live in some kind of freak
alternate
bubble
universe,
you think, okay,
yeah,
what?
No, I get it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I've seen clips of the Acolyte, and I'm like, "What the hell is this?"
I know.
It's got I don't even want to go into it, but it was bad. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
At least Enterprise never got to, it never got there.
No.
The
most I will say about the lackluster season 3 of Enterprise is that no matter how weak sauce it really is, I can clearly see the attempt to still try and keep it Star Trek while still trying to do something. No, so it's not that they weren't trying, they were. I just think they were too afraid to do what they really wanted, unfortunately. So,
and too in love with recycling old ideas.
I wonder if they were even really aware of it, or when you're in there, when you're in that bubble, do you just not see it, or were they too close to see it? Like in the writer's room, did they convince themselves that it was this thing when it's really this thing, and they just didn't see it for what it was?
I think it was a conscious choice. I think they wanted, in their effort to give people what they thought they wanted. Like, well, we have to recycle old ideas to do that.
You really think that was an active thought?
Maybe not in those exact words, but I think so to some extent. I think, they wanted to give people what they wanted. So they did.
Interesting. Boy.
I mean, I think maybe I heard this anecdote from somewhere. I can't remember, but I think it was about seaQuest. And maybe
this has come up more than a few times recently in our lives. Maybe we've been talking about seaQuest.
Maybe it was seaQuest, I think, but it was a sci-fi show, and the first season had potential. And I think the actor, and I know it's not, maybe it was what's his face,
Roy Scheider.
Roy Scheider, but
he's so leathery.
Yeah, maybe it was him. But then by the time they got to because he admired the premise, and that's why he signed on. But by the time they got to the second season, he's like, oh, this is complete trash. And the anecdote I'm thinking of is that he or she, whoever this was, walked into the writer's room and saw them like literally just saying, like, putting on like Terminator, and they're like, oh, let's rip this off this week, or something. They were just pulling whatever they could, and saying, let's just rip it off. And maybe that was seaQuest, maybe it was something else.
I haven't heard that,
but I don't know. I don't know why my mind keeps going back to seaQuest. Maybe because the show did have potential and they blew it.
Potential.
And if you try to watch it today, it's like it's so hard to get
so
through.
bad.
It's not like watching Ladybugs, to speak of a Jonathan Brandis vehicle, but I mean, it's not like watching that where you can still get some fun out of it. That show is just like, woo, man, it's tough going.
I always think of the line that Edward James Olmos gave to the producers of Battlestar Galactica, because they sold him on a premise,
right?
Because he said, I'm not really a sci-fi guy. That's not really my thing, And they said, no. Don't think of it as sci-fi.
I like teaching inner city kids math.
This is a war drama.
Yeah.
This is like World War II in space.
You're a battleship.
Yeah, like the battleship. And they sold him on that. And he told them, and I've seen him give this quote in interviews. He said, all right, guys, I'm on board. But the second you put a one-eyed purple alien in front of me, Admiral Adama dies of a heart attack off screen in the next scene. I promise you. And he's like, they stuck to their word. They never put that alien in front of me. But he challenged them to never lose sight of their premise.
Right.
Because if they had, they would have lost their star. And I don't know. Could that have been done with Enterprise? I don't know.
You mean them take a chance? And
take a chance, but keep the course. Keep it Star Trek, but keep the course. Have someone holding them to that standard.
Well, I think you're right, because I mean we've reiterated this, is that they had a core audience to respect, and they had a new audience they wanted to bring in. How can they do that? It's just like with Star Wars. How do they do that? They can't figure it out.
No one can. No one can figure this out.
So when it came to Battlestar Galactica, they really didn't have anything to lose. I mean, they're revamping an old 70s show that lasted a season.
One season.
So, I mean, come on. Who cares if it was good or not? I didn't expect anything from it. My expectations from BSG, the early 2000s, I had none.
Right.
I was like, why are they remaking a cheesy show from the 70s? It's like, whatever.
It still rules, by the way.
The 70s
the original.
one, yeah. The early 2000s BSG, not so much.
But it's not the same.
But at the time, it was groundbreaking TV.
Yes.
It really was.
Oh, yeah. 100%. I remember when that was airing.
It was like
we were on the edge of our seat.
Yeah, I was like, oh my God, each episode was better than the next.
And you were like, what are they going to do?
It's like, this is amazing. I
Are
was
they
like,
really going to blow
like,
Baltar out the thing?
Yeah, who
oh
would
my
have thought
gosh.
like Battlestar Galactica is a good, it's a drama and it's good. What the hell?
Yeah, I know. It like blew people's
I
minds.
was like, okay. And it was on the Sci-Fi Channel of all places.
Right.
I mean, it was just completely unexpected. You know, it was like when well, not as much, but when Cobra Kai, that first season turned out to be interesting. You're like, wow, they actually pulled off something interesting with this show.
Yeah, everyone was like, all right.
Yeah, it's
I
actually,
guess I'll keep watching.
There's actually like drama in this show, and it's heartfelt in some places.
Mhm.
Okay. Even when Daniel-san kicked the boba tea.
And then it became the cartoon that it is.
Let's make him a car salesman. Stupid.
The sleaziest job they could have put him in, but
car
whatever.
salesman. Whatever.
I know.
Why not making him a doctor or
A
something?
lawyer.
Anything.
You know, a pro bono lawyer, something.
I don't know.
Fighting the good fight.
Why couldn't he be selling Mr. Miyagi's little trees? Like,
I would have had no problem with that.
well, yeah, why make him a sleazy
Slimy
car
salesman that never factors into anything in the show. The fact that he is a car salesman.
Yeah, I would have respected him more if he was the head of Recall, you know, like in Total Recall. Like if he was selling memories, like that would have been better than being a car salesman.
I agree with you completely.
Anyway.
Isn't that worth a measly 10 credits?
Absolutely. Yeah. So about Chosen Realm, because we've got...
Don't let her leave. Don't let him leave.
We've gotten way off.
Yeah. Now we're talking Total Recall.
I know.
It's time to go.
Well, it's because this episode is not good.
No.
And we don't want to talk about it. There's nothing to talk about. It's just not good.
No.
So what would you grade Chosen Realm?
It's a pickle when it comes to something like this, because there's what the episode is and what the episode is grand scheme. Grand scheme, it's a D. As an episode, I mean, it's a C. It's fine.
Yeah.
There's nothing technically wrong with it.
I'll give it a C plus.
I'm going to stick with my C.
And then P.S. you might shoot your eye out. But that's about it.
Okay.
So as for we have no correspondence this week. Nobody wanted to write in about Chosen Realm.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah, I haven't heard from Sebastian in a couple weeks.
We're still here, man.
Hope you're doing okay.
Yeah.
We'd like to hear from you again. For any new listeners we might pick up, although we haven't been picking up any new listeners. Nobody's been dropping in to hear about season 3. But in case we do, Sebastian is our honorary crew member.
Yeah.
At the moment, who would write to us regularly about his thoughts and whatnot, and we would share them. So we hope to hear from you again, Sebastian. Hope you're okay.
Hope so.
And anyone else who'd like to write in, please
Absolutely.
do. With your thoughts before we get to the next. What is the next one?
That's what I was looking at. So the next one is Proving Ground, which has a top-rated banner.
Oh boy,
attached to it. So, and for what it's worth, he's in it.
Oh, so we're going to go from scraping the bottom of the barrel to
we got Shran
close
back.
To the top of the barrel?
Maybe so.
Okay. So if you had something that you wanted to add in about Proving Ground before we get to it next week, write in.
Please.
I'd like to hear from you. We'll read your email during the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was everything. If you'd like to write in, the email is podcastnx01@gmail.com, and you can leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. Help out the show.
Do it.
Yeah, help balance out our rating a little bit, because some jerk gave us 1 star. But I mean, I'm sure we deserved it. But anyway.
I don't know. I think we're gold, man.
Yeah.
All right.
See you. We'll find out if they prove the ground next week.
Yeah. Let's see if they prove it.